What happens when a future king decides that family bloodlines are no longer sacred? What happens when the quiet dignity of royal tradition collides with the cold edge of modern accountability? It sounds like something out of a Shakespearean tragedy, but this time, it's real. The House of Windsor, already trembling under the weight of scandal, has just witnessed one of its most shocking moves yet. Prince William, the man destined to inherit the crown, has reportedly stripped his own cousins, Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie, of their royal titles. And the reason? Their father, Prince Andrew, the Duke of York no longer, has finally given up the last of his royal honors after years of relentless controversy. But beneath that official statement from Buckingham Palace lies something far darker, far more emotional, and far more personal than the palace will ever admit. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. When the palace doors closed that Friday morning, the world only saw a neatly typed statement. But inside those walls, a storm had already begun. The phrase, "with the king's approval and the Prince of Wales' advice," seemed harmless enough. But to insiders, it signaled something seismic. The moment William's quiet influence became royal command. Because this wasn't just a procedural cleanup after Andrew's disgrace. This was William's first major act as the de facto enforcer of the crown's reputation. And his decision to let the consequences fall on Beatrice and Eugenie, two women with no scandals, no crimes, and no power, raised the question that would split both the public and the palace. Had the future king just punished the innocent to protect the throne? Imagine the silence in that gilded room as Andrew's statement was drafted. Courtiers hovering over every word, knowing that one wrong phrase could set off a media firestorm. The ink barely dry before it hit the press wires. The Duke of York will no longer use any royal titles or honors. A single line, years in the making. But for his daughters, it was more than a press release. It was a death sentence for their royal identities. Because once the head of the family falls, the tremors ripple outward. And by evening, the whisper campaign had already begun. William had advised the king that Beatrice and Eugenie's public roles would no longer align with the future image of the monarchy. Translation? Their titles were gone. Quietly. Permanently. You have to ask yourself, was this justice or vengeance? Was it about protecting the image of the monarchy, or about William sending a message that even royal blood wouldn't shield anyone from accountability anymore? The irony was bitter. William, the same man who once swore to modernize the crown with compassion and transparency, now being accused of ruthlessly cutting down his own cousins to save face. The image of the caring, grounded heir suddenly looked more like that of a cold strategist, a man willing to sever family ties for the sake of the throne. But here's what makes this moment so emotionally charged. Beatrice and Eugenie weren't just random royals. They were the daughters of the Queen's second son, the granddaughters who sat beside her at Christmas services, who laughed with her on the Balmoral lawns. And now, with Charles fighting his own health battles and the family still reeling from public distrust, their erasure from royal life feels almost symbolic. A generational purge to protect what's left of the monarchy's image. But behind that polished strategy lies heartbreak. Imagine realizing that your royal titles, the very thing you were born into, were not yours to keep, but yours to lose, depending on your father's mistakes. Let's rewind for a moment. Think about the sequence of humiliation that began with Andrew's fall. From His Royal Highness to private citizen. From palace duties to legal scandals. From privilege to public shame. Each title stripped away piece by piece, until there was nothing left but a name and a tarnished reputation. The final blow came when he agreed to surrender his remaining honors, reportedly to avoid distracting from His Majesty's work. The phrasing was clinical, but the meaning was brutal. It was the monarchy saying, "You are no longer part of the institution, only part of the problem." And William, ever conscious of public opinion, knew the optics of keeping any connection to that name could drag the crown through yet another crisis. So what does a man like William do? He acts decisively. Some might even say ruthlessly. To him, the future of the monarchy depends on cutting away anything that threatens its survival. But here's the contradiction. In protecting the crown, he may have just cracked the foundation of family loyalty. Because no one expected him to go after Beatrice and Eugenie, not after everything they've endured. They stayed quiet when the tabloids feasted on their father's downfall. They avoided interviews, public statements, and controversies. They remained loyal. But loyalty, it seems, wasn't enough. According to palace insiders, William viewed their continued use of royal titles as optically problematic. In his mind, the public saw them as extensions of their disgraced father, and that perception, he believed, could reignite the resentment that nearly destroyed the royal brand during Andrew's scandal. His argument was pragmatic, his tone reportedly cold, and though Charles agreed, reluctantly, it was William who pushed the final decision through. One insider even described the atmosphere as icy between William and his father that week. The king, torn between duty and compassion, gave in. Because when the future of the monarchy is at stake, emotion always comes second. But the story doesn't end with a royal decree. It begins with the emotional fallout. Picture Beatrice, at home, scrolling through headlines announcing her fate before the palace even called. Imagine Eugenie's shock, finding out through a journalist's message instead of a family phone call. For two women who've spent their lives balancing public scrutiny and private restraint, this was the ultimate betrayal. They weren't just demoted, they were disowned in spirit. It's the kind of silent cruelty that doesn't come from malice, but from power. And yet, what makes this story resonate isn't just royal drama. It's the deeply human conflict at its core. How do you forgive family for turning on you? How do you separate royal duty from personal love? When William made that decision, he didn't just strip titles, he stripped trust. And once that's gone, it doesn't return easily. It's like removing gold from a crown. It still shines, but it's lighter, emptier, and no longer whole. Still, from William's perspective, he might argue this was necessary. That the monarchy's survival depends on discipline. That every scandal connected to Andrew's name, even indirectly, could cost them their credibility. That as future king, he must think not as a cousin, but as a commander. But here's the contradiction again. Monarchy survives on loyalty, not logic. It's built on family, not fear. And if the foundation is cracking from within, no PR strategy can fix it. Now, you might be wondering, what about King Charles? Where was his heart in all this? Sources close to the palace suggest the king's statement approving Andrew's decision was bittersweet. He wanted to believe it would bring closure. Instead, it opened old wounds. Because Charles has always carried the burden of family image, from the Diana years to the Andrew scandal, to his own struggles with public trust. And just when the dust seemed to settle, his son took an even bolder, more divisive step. Behind the scenes, courtiers whispered that Charles looked visibly tired when discussing the issue. Almost as if he feared that William's pragmatism might eventually turn cold toward him, too. It's easy to see the parallels, a father trying to hold his family together and a son trying to hold the monarchy together. Both driven by duty, both losing pieces of their humanity in the process. But where Charles hesitates, William acts. And that's what terrifies the old guard at Buckingham Palace. Because a decisive heir can save the crown or shatter it. The public reaction was instant. Outrage, disbelief, confusion. How could two blameless princesses be punished for their father's disgrace? But others applauded the move. About time the monarchy modernized, one headline read. Another praised William for drawing a firm line between duty and nepotism. The divide was clear. The monarchy's supporters saw strength, its critics saw cruelty. And in that split, you could feel the echo of past royal traumas, the exile of Edward VIII, the shunning of Diana, the departure of Harry and Meghan. The monarchy has always sacrificed emotion for image, and this time, it was Beatrice and Eugenie's turn to bleed for the crown. Now imagine the palace corridors that evening. The air tense, the conversations hushed. Aides scurrying between offices, reporters circling like hawks. William, stone-faced, reviewing the next day's media coverage. Kate, quiet but uneasy, knowing the storm was only beginning. And somewhere across town, Beatrice and Eugenie sitting together in disbelief, their phones buzzing with sympathy texts and unanswered questions. The family that once stood united under a crown now looked like fractured glass. Beautiful, fragile, and one crack away from shattering completely. But what's most fascinating is how history seems to be repeating itself. Years ago, the Queen faced a similar decision when she distanced the monarchy from scandal. Back then, she did it with silence. Now, William does it with precision. The monarchy evolves, but its methods stay the same. Sacrifice one to protect the whole. But this time, the sacrifice wasn't just one man. It was two women caught in the shadow of a fallen father, punished not for what they did, but for who they are. And maybe that's the real tragedy here. Because in trying to protect the monarchy's dignity, William may have reignited the very narrative he wanted to escape, that the royal family eats its own to survive. The institution that preaches unity thrives on division. The family that stands for tradition now seems trapped by it. And the heir who once promised renewal now stands accused of repeating the sins of his predecessors. So where does this leave them now? With the public watching every move, Beatrice and Eugenie face an impossible choice: remain silent and complicit, or speak and risk exile. And according to some sources, one of them may have already made that choice. A choice that could expose everything the palace is trying so hard to hide. Because this story isn't over. Not even close. Behind the polished palace gates, more secrets are stirring. There are whispers of private conversations, letters exchanged, alliances shifting. What William has set in motion could unravel faster than anyone expected. The monarchy may have gained control, but at what cost? And as the lights dim over Buckingham Palace, one question lingers in the air like a ghost. How far is Prince William willing to go to save the crown? Even if it means destroying the family that wears it? Because the next move, the one that shocked even the royal advisors, is the one that truly changed everything. It began quietly. No trumpets, no grand announcement. Just a crisp white statement from Buckingham Palace, released into the world like a knife wrapped in silk. With the approval of His Majesty the King, the Duke of York will no longer use any remaining royal titles or honors. 12 words that carried the weight of 1,000 scandals. 12 words that ended centuries of tradition for one man. And set the stage for the most ruthless royal reckoning of the decade. Imagine it. Andrew, once the Queen's favorite son, now a shadow pacing the halls of Royal Lodge. The curtains drawn. The phone silent. The title's gone. His monogram, the proud intertwined A and crown, erased from official stationery, uniforms, and plaques. Everything that once screamed royal about his existence had been stripped bare. He wasn't a duke anymore. Not a prince in the working sense. Just Andrew. A man surrounded by echoes of a life he'd lost. But here's what most people don't realize. This wasn't a spontaneous decision. It wasn't compassion. It wasn't mercy. It was pressure from the top and from within. Because by the time the palace statement hit the press, the real decision had already been made. Not by King Charles, but by his son, Prince William, the future king, the man who, according to insiders, told his father, "We can't let this drag us down any further." And just like that, the last piece of Andrew's royal identity was gone. Let's be honest, we all saw it coming. From the disastrous BBC interview that turned him into a global punchline, to the lawsuits, the settlements, the exile. It was only a matter of time before the monarchy cut him off completely. But what no one expected was how coldly and efficiently it would happen. There was no farewell ceremony, no emotional goodbye. Just a line on Buckingham Palace letterhead, the monarchy's version of a guillotine. But why now? Why after years of silence? Why when Andrew had already faded into near irrelevance? Because, according to palace insiders, William had had enough. He'd watched as Andrew's shadow lingered over every royal engagement, every charity event, every photo call. No matter what good the monarchy did, that shadow crept back in. And with King Charles's health reportedly fragile, William knew the burden would soon fall on him to lead. So he made a choice. A harsh one, a strategic one, a personal one. But here's the contradiction that makes this story sting. It wasn't just about the scandal. It was about control. William was tired of watching the monarchy react. He wanted it to act. To move like a modern institution, not a relic waiting to be mocked. And if that meant cutting off his uncle, so be it. Duty over emotion. Image over intimacy. The crown over blood. Still, behind every royal decision is a human cost. Picture Andrew, sitting alone in his study at Royal Lodge as the news alerts started buzzing. His daughters, Beatrice and Eugenie, calling one after the other, voices tight, asking, "Is it true?" What do you say in that moment? How do you explain to your children that the name that once opened doors now shuts them? Because for all his failings, Andrew still had one piece of leverage left, his role as their father. And in the royal world, titles are currency. Now, even that was worthless. The public, of course, cheered. Accountability at last, the headlines blared. A new era of responsibility. But inside the palace, things were anything but celebratory. The king was torn. He loved his brother, the same brother who had walked beside him in processions since childhood. But he also loved the crown. And as much as it hurt, one had to be sacrificed to protect the other. According to one palace source, Charles spent the entire morning before the announcement pacing his study, pen in hand, the statement lying blank on his desk. His private secretary waited. His advisors urged him to be firm. But it wasn't until a brief call with William that he finally signed. The moment the ink touched the paper, a piece of family history was erased. The next day, Buckingham Palace was silent. No official appearances. No smiles for the cameras. Only whispers echoing through marble corridors. Because the fallout wasn't over. Not even close. Behind the scenes, William's name was on everyone's lips. "He's taking control now," one aide reportedly muttered. "He's the power behind the crown." That phrase, the power behind the crown, would come to define the next phase of this royal crisis. Because once Andrew's titles were gone, William's gaze turned to what he saw as the next problem. The optics of Beatrice and Eugenie still holding theirs. Two young women, innocent in all of this, suddenly caught in the political chess game of a future king trying to prove his authority. But before we get there, let's pause for a moment and look at the irony. Prince Andrew once stood as the royal family's war hero, a helicopter pilot during the Falklands conflict, adored by the Queen, charming in his youth. He had it all. And now, every trace of that past had been surgically removed. His royal patronage is gone. His HRH title mothballed. Even his military honors surrendered. You'd think that would be enough humiliation for one lifetime. But the monarchy doesn't just take your titles. It takes your identity. Once you're out, you're not even a ghost. You're a memory everyone's been told to forget. That's what makes this story so haunting. Because while the world saw Andrew's downfall as justice, inside those palace walls, it was seen as necessary, but cruel, especially by his daughters. Sources close to the family said that Beatrice, ever the peacemaker, tried to reason with her cousin William. She wanted time, space, a gradual distancing, not a total cut. But William's mind was made up. "If we do this halfway," he reportedly said, "the public will think we're hiding something." It's cold logic, but effective, because by erasing Andrew's remaining honors, William effectively ended the scandal, at least publicly. The palace's message was clear. The monarchy had cleaned house. No more distractions. No more excuses. But beneath that polished surface, resentment was building. Quiet. Slow. Dangerous. One insider described the atmosphere between the cousins as frosty at best after the announcement. The family WhatsApp group. Yes, they actually have one. Went silent. No more cheerful emojis. No more casual check-ins. Just a void. And in that silence, the damage grew. Meanwhile, the tabloids spun their usual web of theories. Some claimed William and Kate saw Beatrice and Eugenie as potential liabilities. Others suggested they simply wanted a smaller, more streamlined monarchy, one without extended family clinging to outdated privileges. But the truth, as always with the royals, lies somewhere in the middle. Power and perception, image and inheritance. You can't separate one from the other. And through it all, Andrew stayed silent. Which might be the most telling detail of all. Because for a man once addicted to attention, silence is not humility, it's survival. He knows that every word he speaks now reflects on the king, on William, and on the fragile trust the monarchy is trying to rebuild. So he stays in his mansion, walking the same halls where his mother once visited, surrounded by portraits of a world that no longer exists. But make no mistake, this wasn't the end of Andrew's influence. Not entirely. Because while the palace stripped him of everything official, they couldn't take away what he knows. The secrets, the conversations, the buried details of royal life that no outsider could ever confirm. But he could. And that makes him dangerous. Especially to a future king who built his image on being flawless, transparent, untouchable. The irony here is poetic. The man the monarchy wanted to silence forever might just hold the power to speak its most devastating truth. And William knows it. That's why this isn't just about Andrew's titles. It's about removing every trace of his reach, including his daughters. Because as long as they remained Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie, Andrew's shadow lingered. Every public appearance they made reminded the world of their father's sins. Every headline tied back to his name. And that, for William, was unacceptable. So as Andrew faded quietly from the royal record, his daughters unknowingly became the next targets of reform. Innocent casualties in the monarchy's war for relevance. The Duke may have surrendered, but the real battle, the one that would divide the family and test William's humanity, was just beginning. Because what William did next didn't just shock the public. It shocked his own blood. The royal cousins who once shared laughter at Christmas dinners would soon find themselves on opposite sides of history. And it all began with a secret meeting, one that would change everything they thought they knew about family, power, and loyalty. It was late. The kind of London night where the fog rolls over the palace walls, and even the guards outside seem to stand a little straighter, sensing something heavy in the air. Inside Clarence's house, every light on the top floor was blazing. Staff whispered that the meeting had been going on for hours. The doors were closed, the curtains drawn, and inside sat three men: King Charles III, Prince William, and Sir Clive Alderton, the king's private secretary. But make no mistake, only one voice truly carried the room. William's. The heir to the throne wasn't pacing, wasn't shouting. He didn't need to. His calmness was sharper than anger. His tone clipped, deliberate. Every word chosen like a chess move. "We have to move quickly," he said, looking between his father and the secretary. "Andrew's surrender isn't enough. The public sees him as the rod, and anything connected to him is poison. If we don't cut this cleanly, it will infect everything else." Charles rubbed his forehead. He looked older that night, tired, his eyes heavy from the weeks of tension. He'd thought Andrew's final surrender of honors would close the book on this ugly chapter. But William had other plans. "You mean his daughters?" Charles said quietly, as if saying it aloud made it more cruel. "You want to strip Beatrice and Eugenie too?" William's response was immediate. "Not strip, father. Reposition. Quietly. We don't announce it. We just move forward without them." The phrasing was surgical, emotionless, as if he were discussing corporate restructuring rather than family. Sir Clive nodded. He'd seen this before, the quiet dismantling of royal roles to protect the crown. But this felt different. There was no scandal attached to Beatrice or Eugenie. No misstep. No crime. Just guilt by bloodline. Still, he knew better than to argue. The machine had to keep running. "Public sentiment is fragile," William continued, his voice low but firm. "The monarchy is one misstep away from collapse. Andrew's name can't linger. His daughters can't remain visible reminders of his failures. The crown has to look ruthless to survive." Charles shifted in his seat. "Ruthless," he repeated, almost tasting the word like it was poison. "Is that what we've become?" "It's what we've always been," William replied. "We just stopped admitting it." For a moment, silence filled the room. The ticking of an antique clock echoed off the walls, the sound sharp in the tension. Charles looked toward the window, the glow of the palace across the street reminding him of the burden that came with it, the weight of history pressing down on blood and bone. He wanted to resist, to protect his nieces. But deep down, he knew his son was right. The monarchy's survival had always come at a cost. Still, the king hesitated. "Your grandmother would have found another way," he murmured. William didn't flinch. "And look where her silence got us," he said quietly. "Years of cover-ups, compromises, and delayed reckonings. The public doesn't want sympathy, father. They want strength." It was brutal logic, and Charles knew it. But he also recognized something else. William wasn't just acting as heir. He was acting as king. It was his rehearsal for the throne, his moment to show he could make the hard choices. And the way he looked across that table made it clear he'd already decided. But here's the thing about royal decisions. They're never just business. They're personal. William's determination to cut Beatrice and Eugenie from public roles wasn't only about optics. It was about resentment. Deep down, he'd never forgiven their father for tainting the family name. Every headline, every jeer, every awkward question in interviews, all reminders of how fragile the monarchy's image had become. In William's mind, removing Andrew's daughters was the final step in cleansing that legacy. Sir Clive finally broke the silence. "If we move forward, sir, there will be backlash," he warned. Beatrice and Eugenie are popular with younger audiences. The optics. William cut him off. Optics are exactly why we're doing this. They have no official roles, no constitutional purpose. But they carry royal titles, which means every time they're photographed, it looks like we've forgiven Andrew by proxy. The public sees them, they think of him. It's that simple. Charles sighed deeply. The burden of leadership is cruel when it turns you against your own. He'd always loved Beatrice's warmth, Eugenie's honesty, their quiet devotion to the late queen. They were good girls, innocent in this mess. But William's argument was unshakable. What do you propose we tell them? Charles finally asked. Nothing, William said. We let it happen naturally. Gradually. They'll understand. Understand. That word lingered like smoke. Because in truth, there would be no understanding. Only confusion. Only pain. Only betrayal disguised as pragmatism. But here's where the story takes its first unexpected twist. The room wasn't as private as they thought. Outside, a young aide lingered in the corridor, assigned to deliver late tea. She heard fragments through the heavy oak door. Titles, public image, Beatrice, and Eugenie. She froze. Her hands trembled. By the next morning, whispers had already spread through the staff network like wildfire. And in a palace where secrets are worth more than gold, those whispers never stay buried for long. While the courtiers talked, William's plan took shape. Over the next days, documents were quietly revised. Website bios were edited. Mentions of HRH Princess Beatrice and HRH Princess Eugenie began to disappear from internal royal correspondence. No announcements. No press leaks. Just quiet erasure. Death by deletion. The emotional toll inside the family was immediate, though few dared speak of it aloud. Beatrice reportedly sensed something was off when her requests to represent a charity under the royal banner were met with sudden hesitation. We're re-evaluating public-facing roles, came the polite reply from the palace office. Translation, she was being phased out. Eugenie, ever more outspoken, asked directly if this was William's doing. The response? A long silence, followed by a curt, "These decisions are collective," which, of course, meant yes. Meanwhile, the king withdrew into his usual routine, official engagements by day, private reflection by night. Those closest to him said he seemed conflicted, torn between his fatherly instinct and his kingly duty. Some nights, he reportedly took long walks through the palace gardens, muttering that he hoped they'd forgive him one day. But forgiveness rarely finds its way into royal bloodlines. And William? He was resolute. He believed he was protecting the institution. He believed he was doing what had to be done. But power changes people. And for the first time, those around him began to sense something colder in his demeanor, a certain distance, as if he'd already accepted that to be king meant to stop being human. That's when Princess Anne got involved. She'd been silent for most of the debate, preferring to observe rather than interfere. But as word of the secret council began to leak, she demanded answers. Are we punishing the girls for Andrew's mistakes? She reportedly asked William in a terse phone call. His response was pure logic, but devoid of empathy. We're protecting the monarchy, Aunt Anne. That's all this is. But Anne wasn't convinced. The monarchy is a family first, she said, her voice rising. Forget that, and you'll destroy it from the inside out. The argument didn't end well. William hung up first. Inside the palace, loyalties began to shift. Some courtiers quietly sided with Anne, believing William had gone too far. Others rallied around the heir, convinced he was the only one strong enough to modernize the institution. It was a silent war, polite smiles at breakfast, daggers behind closed doors. But perhaps the most painful part of all was how quickly the narrative began to spread in the media before the family could even prepare. Headlines speculated that Beatrice and Eugenie could lose remaining titles amid royal reform. None of it was officially confirmed, of course, but everyone knew where it came from. Someone inside Clarence's house had talked. Whether intentionally or not, William's private counsel was no longer secret. The leak enraged him. According to palace insiders, he confronted staff, furious that the discretion he'd demanded was gone. His fury wasn't theatrical, it was ice cold. This family can't keep its own confidence, he snapped, before leaving the room without another word. That's the thing about power, it isolates. And in that isolation, William found himself slowly becoming the very thing he'd sworn to modernize. A monarch who rules through fear and silence. The irony wasn't lost on those around him. They'd seen it before, in past generations, in the same gilded halls. History repeating itself, wearing a younger face. Meanwhile, Beatrice and Eugenie's confusion turned to hurt. "We did everything right," Eugenie reportedly told a close friend. "We stayed quiet. We supported the family. Why us?" Beatrice, always more reserved, tried to calm her sister. But even she couldn't hide her disbelief. "He's supposed to protect us," she said softly. "He's our cousin." And in that sentence, those 6 words, lies the tragedy of the modern monarchy. Because for William, family had become collateral. The future of the crown mattered more than the people wearing it. And with that decision, the dominoes were set in motion. But what no one in that council room realized was that their plan wouldn't stay hidden forever. Someone inside, someone trusted, had kept notes. Notes that would eventually find their way into the wrong hands. And when those words surfaced, the world would learn just how far William was willing to go to protect his legacy. Because this wasn't the end of the story. This was the moment the palace's carefully built facade began to crack. And when the truth slipped through that first fracture, it would expose something that even the crown couldn't contain. The palace had seen its fair share of conflicts, but few were as quietly explosive as the one that began when Princess and decided she'd had enough. It started with a single phone call. No aides, no courtiers, no scripted pleasantries. Just, and the only daughter of Queen Elizabeth II, calling her nephew, the future King of England, to tell him, bluntly, that he was wrong. "William," she began, her voice calm but sharp, "you can't keep cutting family off like this. It's not leadership, it's fear." For a moment, there was silence on the line. William's response, when it came, was measured but distant. "Aunt, and this isn't about family. It's about the institution. The monarchy can't afford sentimentality right now." "Rubbish," and snapped. "The monarchy is family. Without it, it's just a costume drama." And had never been one for sugarcoating. She'd seen it all. Divorces, scandals, wars of reputation. And she knew the one thing the monarchy couldn't survive was division from within. To her, what William was doing wasn't reform, it was a purge. And that terrified her more than any headline ever could. You see, and had been through this cycle before. She remembered the Windsor crises of the 1990s, Charles and Diana's implosion, Andrew's reckless behavior, the Queen's annus horribilis. She'd seen how pride and protocol had nearly torn the family apart. And now, watching William repeat those same mistakes, she saw history circling back like a curse. Inside Buckingham Palace, whispers spread quickly that the Princess Royal is furious. Staff described her tone as incendiary. And wasn't just angry, she was disappointed. Because she believed in William once. She'd thought he would be the bridge between the monarchy's old ways and the new world. But to her eyes now, he wasn't building bridges. He was burning them. When Anne arrived at Clarence's house a few days later, she didn't wait to be announced. She marched straight into William's private office, where he sat reading briefing papers with the kind of focus only someone avoiding confrontation could muster. She closed the door behind her and spoke before he could rise. "You're making a mistake," she said flatly. William looked up, tired, defensive. "I know why you're here, Aunt Anne, and I know how it looks. But you have to trust me on this. The public." "Don't start with the public," and interrupted. "This isn't about the public. It's about decency. Beatrice and Eugenie have done nothing wrong, and you know it." He sighed, setting down the papers. "They're good girls, yes, but they're symbols of a broken link. Every time they appear, the press ties it back to Andrew. The monarchy has to evolve." And crossed her arms, eyes narrowing. "Evolve? You're not evolving, William. You're amputating." The tension between them could have been cut with a crown jewel. Neither raised their voice, but the weight of generations hung between their words. And leaned forward slightly. "Do you know what your grandmother used to say about family? We carry one another's burdens, or the crown carries none of us. Have you forgotten that?" William's jaw tightened. Grandmother didn't live in a world where every scandal goes viral within minutes. "I have to think strategically. Emotion doesn't win public trust. Then you're leading the wrong people," and shot back. There it was, the moment when the monarchy's iron-willed aunt and its iron-nerved heir finally clashed head-on. It wasn't about Andrew anymore. It was about philosophy, legacy, and humanity. and represented the old world of quiet endurance. William represented the new world of image management. 2 generations, 2 ideologies, 1 crown. Outside the door, aides pretended to type emails, pretending not to hear the muffled argument echoing through the corridor. But word would spread, as it always does in the palace, that Princess Anne had challenged the heir. It hadn't happened since she'd confronted her brother Charles during the Diana years. History repeating itself, again. And yet, despite her fiery words, Anne wasn't blind to the reality. She understood the logic behind William's actions. She just couldn't accept the cruelty in the execution. To her, Beatrice and Eugenie were victims of circumstance, not culprits of scandal. They were doing what royals are supposed to do: represent quietly, serve modestly, and avoid headlines. And now they were being punished for their father's sins. After leaving Clarence's house, and didn't go home. She went to see the king. Charles had just finished an audience when she walked in without knocking. "We need to talk," she said, not even waiting for him to greet her. He knew that tone. It was the same one their mother used when she was about to deliver a verbal storm. "And," he sighed, "please don't." "No," she interrupted, her voice firm. "You're letting William run the family like a corporation. You may be king, but he's acting like the CEO. And it's wrong." Charles sat back in his chair, hands clasped. "He's doing what he thinks is right for the institution." And stepped closer. "And what about what's right for the family?" He looked up at her, tired, burdened, but silent. "You can't rebuild public trust by destroying private trust," she continued. "Beatrice and Eugenie still represent the future of this family, whether William likes it or not. They've been loyal, discreet, dignified, everything this institution supposedly stands for. Cutting them off isn't strategy, Charles. It's cowardice." The king's face softened. He didn't argue, because deep down, he agreed with her. But he also knew he was losing control. "You think I haven't tried?" he said quietly. "You think I haven't told him to slow down?" He listens, but he doesn't hear. And nodded slowly. "He's your son. He loves you. But he's terrified of failing you. That's why he's doing this. He thinks he's saving you." Charles looked away, the weight of her words pressing down on him. "And in the process," he said, almost to himself, "he's losing himself." For a brief moment, the room fell silent. 2 siblings, both shaped by duty, both scarred by it, staring at each other and realizing they were trapped in the same cage. One built by expectation, the other by legacy. But Anne wasn't finished. She turned to leave, pausing at the door. "Talk to him," she said softly. "Before this becomes irreversible. Before he becomes the kind of king the people fear instead of love." The next morning, an internal memo circulated through the palace. Vague, impersonal, the kind of bureaucratic ghost note that carries the scent of chaos. It announced that ongoing discussions regarding the structure of royal engagements were being reviewed. In palace speak, that meant the king was rethinking William's proposal. And just like that, a quiet war began. William, upon hearing that his father might be reconsidering, was livid. "He's undermining me," he reportedly told an aide. "I had this under control." But what truly set him off was the realization that it wasn't Charles pulling the strings. It was Anne, the one person in the family he couldn't outmaneuver because she didn't care about rank. She never had. While William's camp dug in and paid a private visit to Beatrice and Eugenie. It wasn't an official meeting, no photographers, no press leaks. Just an aunt visiting her nieces. But to the sisters, it felt like a lifeline. Over tea, and listened as they poured their hearts out. Beatrice, ever composed, tried to make sense of it all. "I just don't understand," she said softly. "We've done nothing wrong." Eugenie, less restrained, was more blunt. "He's treating us like we're liabilities." And reached across the table, her hand steady. "You're not liabilities. You're victims of a system that eats its own to survive." Those words, calm but laced with truth, stayed with them long after and left. Because for the first time, someone inside the palace had said what they all feared to admit. The monarchy doesn't protect its family. It protects itself. But while Anne's intervention gave Beatrice and Eugenie hope, it also painted a target on her back. Senior advisors began whispering that the Princess Royal was interfering in succession matters. Some even suggested that her influence over the king was disruptive. William's allies saw her as a threat, not to his power, but to his narrative. And in the monarchy, Narratives are everything. So when the next official statement came out, short, precise, and devastating, it was clear who had won that round. Buckingham Palace confirmed Andrew's full withdrawal from all royal life. But there was no mention of Beatrice or Eugenie. Their names were simply omitted. Erased by omission. The message was clear. They were next. Anne knew it. That night, she sat alone at Buckingham Park, staring out the window, the wind howling across the fields. For all her strength, even she felt powerless against the tide of inevitability. She whispered to herself something her mother once said in a rare moment of candor. We wear crowns of gold, but they always cut the skin. And had tried to warn them. She had tried to stop it, but the machine was already in motion. William wasn't listening anymore. Not to reason, not to conscience, not to family. He was moving forward, one decision at a time, reshaping the monarchy in his own image. And the next step he would take? It wouldn't just divide the family. It would shatter it. It was a Friday morning that began like any other in the gilded heart of London. The air crisp, the sky overcast, and Buckingham Palace glowing pale under the weak English sun. But inside those ancient walls, something monumental was brewing. At precisely 9 a.m., the Royal Communications Office sent out a single email to global press outlets. The subject line read, "Statement regarding the Duke of York." To the untrained eye, it looked routine. The palace issues statements all the time, condolences, ceremonial updates, diplomatic niceties. But to anyone who understood the rhythm of royal PR, this was different. The timing, the wording, the precision. Something was off. And within minutes, the entire world knew why. The statement read, "Following discussions with His Majesty the King, and with the advice of the Prince of Wales, the Duke of York will cease use of his remaining royal titles and honors. His public roles will not be resumed. The family remains united in service to the crown." 63 words. That's all it took to detonate years of buried tension. At first, it sounded final, the last nail in the coffin of Prince Andrew's public life. But as journalists dissected every line, one phrase stood out like a warning flare. With the advice of the Prince of Wales. That wasn't tradition. That was deliberate. The palace had publicly confirmed what had only been whispered behind closed doors, that Prince William was calling the shots now. Within 10 minutes, newsrooms erupted. Headlines screamed, "William forces Andrew out. Power shift at the palace. Future king moves to protect the crown." But beneath the political headlines and polished language was something far more personal. The invisible fallout that no statement could hide. Because the real victims of that 63-word bombshell weren't sitting in Clarence House. They were sitting miles away, refreshing their phones in disbelief. Beatrice was at home in St. James's when her assistant called. "Ma'am, have you seen the palace release?" Eugenie, in Portugal with her husband, got the news through a push notification before breakfast. For a moment, both sisters thought it was another recycled headline. But as they read the official text, the truth hit them like ice water. Their father, already humiliated, already isolated, had just been erased from royal life completely. And by extension, so had they. But what made it worse wasn't the decision itself. It was the way they found out. Not through a family call, not through a quiet conversation, but through the press, like strangers. That betrayal cut deeper than any public shame ever could. Imagine their confusion. Imagine Beatrice standing in her kitchen, her phone lighting up with messages from friends asking, "Are you okay?" before she even had time to process what had happened. Imagine Eugenie, thousands of miles away, seeing her father's legacy evaporate in black and white print while paparazzi already camped outside her gate. For years, they'd both played by the rules. They'd attended family events, avoided scandal, smiled through the chaos. But now, they were finding out that loyalty didn't guarantee protection, not in William's monarchy. Back at Buckingham Palace, the atmosphere was eerily calm. Courtiers moved quietly, phones ringing off the hook. William, meanwhile, was at Windsor, sitting in his study, watching the media coverage unfold in real time. Those close to him said he appeared unbothered, composed, almost cold. To him, this was strategy executed perfectly. Let it burn for a few days, he reportedly told an aide. The dust will settle. It always does. But it didn't settle. Not this time. Because the public reaction was far more divided than the palace expected. To some, it was justice finally served. The monarchy taking accountability, showing zero tolerance for scandal. Social media lit up with praise for William's decisiveness. "The future king has no patience for corruption," one commenter wrote. Another added, "He's saving the monarchy, one ruthless move at a time." But others saw it differently. "Why punish the daughters?" one headline asked. Beatrice and Eugenie didn't do anything. The comment sections were filled with sympathy for the sisters. "They've already lost enough," someone wrote. "How much more does this family need to sacrifice before it finds peace?" And that's when the real damage began. By noon, the sisters' phones were flooded with calls. Reporters wanted reactions. Charities wanted clarification. Even friends were confused. Would they still appear at royal events? Were they still Her Royal Highness? No one had answers, not even them. Because while the statement had mentioned Andrew, it had said nothing about his daughters. Nothing. That silence spoke louder than words. It meant something was already in motion. Inside palace circles, people began connecting the dots. First, Andrew stripped. Then, the quiet erasure of Beatrice and Eugenie from internal communications. Now, a statement written by William's team, not the king's traditional office. The implication was clear. This was part of a larger plan. A royal rebranding. A new era where even bloodline wasn't safe from scrutiny. The afternoon brought another wave of headlines. William to streamline royal family. Extended titles under review. The tabloids didn't need confirmation. They ran the narrative as fact. Within hours, speculation became reality. And while William projected calm authority, the king was anything but. Charles, informed that his nieces had not been briefed beforehand, reportedly lost his composure. Why weren't they told? He demanded during a private call with the communications secretary. The answer came hesitantly. It was the Prince of Wales' directive, "Your Majesty." Those who witnessed it said Charles went silent, the kind of silence that feels like thunder before a storm. For all his years in royal politics, even he hadn't anticipated just how far his son was willing to go. That night, inside Royal Lodge, Andrew watched the coverage alone. His daughters had called, but he'd said little. "It's for the best," he muttered, though his tone betrayed him. For the best, as if repeating it might make it true. In public, he remained silent. But behind those closed doors, rage simmered. Sources later described him pacing, his face pale, muttering that William's not the king yet. He knew he couldn't fight back publicly, not without drawing more attention, but he wasn't going to sit quietly either. Meanwhile, Beatrice and Eugenie were left in limbo, stripped of clarity, suspended between royal duty and exile. They couldn't defend themselves. They couldn't speak without seeming disloyal. And that silence made them targets for every kind of speculation imaginable. The irony was cruel. In trying to cleanse the royal image, William had reopened the wound of royal hypocrisy. He had become both the executioner and the symbol of the family's cold pragmatism. And the world was watching, not just the British public, but global media hungry for cracks in the monarchy's armor. By evening, something unexpected happened. A quiet rebellion began to stir online. Fans of the York sisters flooded social media with old photos, videos, and tributes. "They've always represented grace," one user posted. Another caption read, "The real victims of royal politics." Hashtags like #StandWithBeatrice and #JusticeForEugenie began trending across platforms. It wasn't just public sympathy, it was defiance. The kind the monarchy hates. At 8 p.m., BBC News ran a segment featuring a royal commentator who summed up the growing sentiment perfectly. "This is not just a palace restructuring. This is a generational clash. Prince William is shaping a monarchy that's colder, leaner, and less forgiving. But the question is, can a family survive when it forgets it's made of people?" That line hit like a dagger, because that was the question haunting Buckingham Palace behind the press releases and polite smiles. Could the institution survive if it consumed its own? Later that night, an emergency meeting was held in one of the smaller drawing rooms at the palace. Not for damage control, for optics management. William's aides were tasked with drafting talking points in case the backlash grew. "Keep the focus on modernization," one advisor said. "Avoid personal language. Stay institutional." The irony of that order was staggering. Stay institutional. As if the family could hide behind its walls forever. By the next morning, the storm hadn't passed. It had evolved. Because while William believed the decision showed strength, others saw weakness. the desperation of a future monarch afraid of public opinion. And among those quietly fuming in the background was Princess Eugenie. The younger York sister wasn't known for confrontation. But that day, something in her shifted. According to sources close to her, she told a friend, "If they think we'll disappear quietly, they're wrong." That friend reportedly advised her to stay calm. But Eugenie's tone was different now. Colder, sharper, more determined. That evening, as the palace tried to maintain its composure, something unexpected appeared on social media. A single post from Eugenie's official account. A photograph of her and Beatrice as children with their father, smiling, carefree, in the days before scandal and headlines. The caption read only one word: family. It stayed up for just 17 minutes before being deleted. But by then, it had already been screenshot thousands of times and shared around the world. The message was clear, even without explanation. It wasn't just nostalgia, it was defiance. And inside Buckingham Palace, the phones began ringing again. The communications team scrambled. William's private secretary stormed into his office with the report. His expression darkened as he read the words on the screen. "She just made this personal," he said quietly. He was right. Because that one small act, that single post, was the first shot in what would soon become a full-blown family rebellion. But what Eugenie didn't know then was that her act of defiance would set off a chain reaction inside the palace. One that would expose conversations, betrayals, and recordings that the crown never wanted the public to hear. And that's when the real war began. The royal family had weathered storms before: divorces, scandals, affairs, betrayals, but nothing like this. Because this time, the fracture wasn't caused by tabloids or outsiders. It came from within, from one of their own. From Princess Eugenie, the sweet, smiling daughter who'd always been loyal, dignified, and silent. Until now. It started as a whisper, a small tremor before the earthquake. A few keen-eyed royal watchers noticed the post within minutes. A soft sepia photograph, Eugenie and Beatrice as children, holding their father's hand during a sunny Balmoral afternoon. Innocent, joyful, timeless. But it was the caption that sent the internet into overdrive. One word: family. No emojis. No explanation. No hashtags. Just that. Within 10 minutes, the comments exploded. "We see you, Eugenie. They can't silence love. She's speaking louder with one word than the palace has in years." The photo spread like wildfire. Screenshots circulated faster than Buckingham Palace could blink. By the time royal aides noticed, the post had already been shared by global media accounts, analyzed, dissected, praised, and condemned. Inside the palace, the reaction was immediate and panicked. "Delete it," one of the communications officers barked down the line. "Get her to delete it now." Calls were made to her assistant. Emails flew between Kensington, Clarence House, and the palace press team. Within 17 minutes, the post was gone, vanished as if it never existed. But the internet never forgets. And neither did the royal family. William was the first to respond. He'd been in a meeting when his phone buzzed with a notification from an aide. He looked down, saw the image, and went completely still. The people in the room knew that look: calm, composed, deadly. "Give me my team," he said quietly. The meeting ended abruptly. Within an hour, a conference call was arranged between his office, the king's advisors, and the palace's crisis communications head. Was it deliberate? Someone asked. William didn't hesitate. Of course it was deliberate. To him, it wasn't a random post. It was a statement, a rebellion, a challenge to his authority, subtle but unmistakable. Because that one word, family, cut through the royal facade like a blade. It exposed what the monarchy tried hardest to hide: the pain behind the smiles, the fractures behind the portraits. But the bigger problem wasn't the post itself. It was what it represented: a shift in power. For the first time since Andrew's downfall, one of his daughters had publicly defied the palace. And that, in William's eyes, was dangerous. By evening, palace officials had drafted a quiet response strategy. No acknowledgement, they decided. No public comment. We treat it as a personal post. Silence is the message. But silence wasn't working anymore. Across social media, Eugenie's name trended globally. News anchors debated whether she was hinting at internal betrayal. Talk shows dissected her timing. The day after the statement about her father, PR analysts called it a masterstroke of emotional communication. Some even called it the modern Diana moment. a subtle, soft rebellion wrapped in empathy. And for the public, it struck a chord. Because people love rebels, especially royal ones. That night, Eugenie sat at her home in Portugal, scrolling through the chaos she'd accidentally, or intentionally, unleashed. Her husband, Jack Brooksbank, looked worried. "You knew they'd see it," he said quietly. She didn't deny it. "I wanted them to," she replied. He sighed. "William's not going to like this." Eugenie stared at her phone, at the thousands of comments flooding in, her own face reflected faintly in the screen. "He already doesn't like us," she said. "At least now he knows we won't be silent." What no one knew, not even her sister, was that this moment had been building for months. Eugenie had grown tired of being erased, of watching the palace distance itself from her family, as if loyalty were contagious. She'd stayed quiet when her father lost his titles. She'd smiled at events she wasn't invited to speak at. She'd listened as William's allies described her as non-essential. But enough was enough. She wasn't rebelling against the crown. She was standing up for blood. Back in London, Beatrice was blindsided. She hadn't known about the post. When reporters began calling her office for comment, she panicked. "What post?" she asked her assistant. Then she saw it. Her heart sank. She loved her sister, but she knew what this meant. The palace would retaliate. Quietly, ruthlessly. And sure enough, within hours, the backlash began, not in the press, but behind palace doors. Invitations quietly rescinded. Scheduled appearances quietly postponed. Phone calls suddenly unreturned. By the next morning, the palace's digital team had already begun correcting search results on official royal websites. Mentions of Beatrice and Eugenie as HRH were scrubbed. Their bios shortened. Their upcoming engagements removed. It was retaliation disguised as routine website maintenance. But the internet noticed. And once again, the story spread. "Royal sisters erased from official site," one headline read. Another, "Buckingham Palace moves swiftly after Eugenie's post." The more the monarchy tried to silence her, the louder her message became. Yet inside her heart, Eugenie wasn't defiant. She was heartbroken. For all her bravery, she hadn't expected the tidal wave of pressure that followed. Overnight, friends began receiving discreet reminders not to speak to the press. Trusted staff members were warned their loyalty might be questioned. One even resigned quietly, saying, "It's not worth losing my job over the truth." Still, Eugenie refused to apologize. When a senior aide called her personally to suggest she issue a clarification, something polite and diplomatic, she simply replied, "There's nothing to clarify. Family means family." The silence on the other end of the line said it all. Words soon reached King Charles. Those close to him say he looked weary when he heard about the post. He didn't shout, didn't scold. He simply closed his eyes for a moment. "She's her father's daughter," he said softly, "and her grandmother's granddaughter." Because deep down, Charles recognized something familiar in her defiance. That same quiet steel that had defined his mother, Queen Elizabeth II. The kind of strength that comes not from rebellion, but from conviction. But for William, it was personal. In his mind, Eugenie had crossed a line, and once someone crossed him, he didn't forget. His team began reviewing communications between her office and the palace. There were even murmurs that certain privileges, security coverage, travel arrangements might be re-evaluated. Nothing official, nothing provable, but everyone understood the message. Fall in line, or you'll feel the consequences. Meanwhile, the press feasted. Paparazzi followed Eugenie everywhere. Photos of her looking tired, distracted, emotional, all turned into sensational headlines. Defiant Eugenie under pressure. Princess on the edge. Every smile was analyzed. Every silence was dissected. The irony was bitter. In trying to show loyalty to her family, Eugenie had become the palace's newest liability. But what William didn't expect, what no one expected, was that the situation was about to escalate even further. Because somewhere deep inside the palace, one person had begun recording everything. Meetings, conversations, orders, notes. A quiet rebellion brewing in the shadows. And when those recordings reached the wrong ears, the monarchy's polished facade would shatter completely. For now, though, the palace pretended all was well. A smiling photo of William and Kate at a charity event conveniently hit the front pages the next morning. a distraction tactic as old as the crown itself. But even that couldn't stop the undercurrent, because for every polished royal image, there was an invisible crack forming beneath it. In Portugal, Eugenie sat on her balcony, the Atlantic wind tugging at her hair, scrolling through the chaos she'd ignited. Jack joined her, setting a mug of tea beside her. "You've started something," he said quietly. Eugenie looked out at the horizon. "No," she replied, voice steady. "William started it. I just stopped pretending." It was a simple line, but a prophetic one, because she didn't know yet that this act of defiance, this one fleeting post, would trigger a chain of events that would spiral far beyond her control. By the following week, the walls of Buckingham Palace were buzzing with paranoia. Emails were being monitored. Meetings were being moved to secure rooms.